you're not losing your mind. Someone is trying to push your limits, twist your words, and make you doubt your own strength. But today, that ends. Because once you learn these 10 tactics, you won't just stand your ground. You'll finally take back the control they thought they owned. Before we dive deeper, make sure you stay with me till the end, because the 10th tactic is the one that instantly flips the power dynamic and leaves them stunned every single time. Recognizing manipulative patterns instantly begins with understanding the subtle psychological moves someone uses to gain control, shift blame, or destabilize your sense of reality. These tactics often appear harmless at first, wrapped in charm, concern, or even humor. But beneath that surface lies a consistent intention to keep you off balance so they can maintain the upper hand. The moment you train yourself to see these patterns, you stop absorbing their behavior as normal and start identifying it as strategy. One of the clearest signs is when conversations consistently leave you confused, guilty, or defensive, even though you did nothing wrong. This emotional whiplash is not accidental. It's designed to make you question yourself. Another pattern appears when your accomplishments are minimized or redirected so that the focus returns to them. They may disguise it as joking, teasing, or offering helpful advice, but the result is always the same. You feel smaller and they feel superior. When you begin noticing these shifts, you instantly interrupt their ability to influence your emotions. Manipulation often hides in the way they handle responsibility. If they make a mistake, it becomes your fault. If something goes wrong, they rewrite the narrative in real time, placing themselves as the victim and you as the cause. Recognizing this pattern means reminding yourself that their story is not the truth. It's simply the version that protects their ego. Another manipulative cue appears when they test boundaries in small ways, pushing just far enough to see how much you'll tolerate. Maybe they interrupt you repeatedly, question your decisions, or subtly mock your feelings. These small boundary violations are not random. They are data points they use to measure how easy you are to influence. When you notice these early, you close the door before they can step any further. Pay attention to the shifts in their tone and expression when you don't respond the way they expect. If they suddenly become cold, irritated, or distant the moment you stand your ground, that change reveals their dependency on controlling the emotional atmosphere. Recognizing their reactions teaches you that their behavior is not a reflection of your worth, but a reaction to losing power. Over time, these patterns become predictable, almost scripted, and once you can anticipate their next move, their control dissolves. Their words stop piercing, their moods stop steering you, and their attempts to manipulate fall flat because you no longer view them as personal attacks, but as predictable tactics designed to provoke you. Maintaining emotional neutrality is one of the most powerful ways to disarm someone who thrives on reactions, chaos, and emotional volatility. When a person relies on provoking you to gain control, your calm becomes a weapon they cannot counter. Emotional neutrality does not mean suppressing your feelings or pretending you don't care. It means you choose not to show the emotional response they are trying to trigger. The moment you stop feeding their need for drama, the dynamic shifts entirely. They expect you to explode, defend yourself, panic, apologize, or over-explain. They thrive on the rise in your voice, the frustration in your tone, and the stress on your face because those signals tell them they still have access to your inner world. Neutrality cuts off that access instantly. When you remain calm, their usual strategies fall flat. If they insult you, your neutral expression sends a silent message that their words have no power. If they try to guilt trip you, your steady tone communicates that you're not absorbing the emotional pressure. If they twist your words, your composed response shows that you're not stepping into the trap. Emotional neutrality forces them to confront something they cannot manipulate: your self control. This destabilizes them because they rely on emotional volatility to steer conversations and control outcomes. Without that fuel, they lose their ability to redirect the situation in their favor. Staying neutral also helps you think clearly. When your emotions are steady, you notice the patterns, the inconsistencies, and the attempts at manipulation far more quickly. You can see the games they're playing because you're not reacting from a place of hurt or confusion. This mental clarity becomes a shield, allowing you to choose your responses strategically instead of impulsively. Neutrality doesn't mean being passive, it means responding from strength rather than emotion. Instead of arguing, you can say something simple and firm like, "I see what you're trying to do, and I'm not engaging." Instead of matching their energy, you keep your tone even and unbothered. This denies them the emotional payoff they're trying to extract. They may escalate at first because your calm threatens their control. They may push harder, trying new angles, raising their voice, or acting offended. But the more you maintain your composure, the more they realize you cannot be moved. Emotional neutrality is like taking the oxygen out of their fire. Eventually, the flames die down because there is nothing left to ignite. Using boundaries as your power shield starts with understanding that limits are not about controlling someone else. They're about controlling what you will and will not allow in your space. A person who thrives on dominance pushes boundaries because every violation gives them more access to your emotional, mental, and personal territory. When you establish clear limits, you interrupt that access. Boundaries are not loud, dramatic, or confrontational. They are calm, consistent lines that protect your peace. The moment you define them, you begin reclaiming control over situations that once felt unpredictable or overwhelming. A boundary can be as simple as deciding you won't engage in conversations that turn manipulative. It can mean refusing to justify your decisions, limiting how much personal information you share, or choosing not to answer calls or messages that come at explosive, emotionally charged moments. Boundaries can also be internal, choosing not to internalize their criticism, rejecting their attempts to define your worth, or reminding yourself that their reactions are not your responsibility. Each time you uphold a boundary, you reinforce your sense of power. Each time you remain firm, you send a message that their old tactics can no longer penetrate you. A person who relies on control often responds negatively when a boundary is introduced. They may accuse you of being cold, dramatic, or selfish. They may test your limit by pushing harder to see if you're serious. This resistance is not a sign your boundary is wrong. It's proof that it's working. Their discomfort comes from losing influence, not from your behavior. When you stay steady and repeat your limit calmly, their ability to override your intentions weakens. Your consistency teaches them that access to your emotions, time, and energy is no longer automatic. The power of boundaries lies in their enforcement. It's not about announcing them loudly, it's about holding them quietly, even when pressured. If you say you won't engage in disrespectful conversations, Then the moment disrespect appears, you disengage. If you decide not to explain yourself repeatedly, you stop the cycle the next time it begins. They may try to provoke you with silence, guilt, or anger, but your calm refusal to bend becomes the shield that protects your inner world. Over time, boundaries reshape the entire dynamic. They create a structure where you no longer respond impulsively or emotionally. They safeguard your clarity, they protect your dignity, and they shift the balance of power back into your hands where it always belonged. Responding with calm, concise statements is one of the most effective ways to shut down manipulation because it removes all the extra emotional material someone can twist, use, or throw back at you. When a person tries to provoke you, they rely on your long explanations, your defensive tone, or your emotional reactions to gain control of the narrative. But when you keep your responses short, steady, and clear, you give them nothing to grab onto. Concise communication forces them to face the reality of your boundaries without giving them the emotional leverage they look for. This approach starts with understanding that not every accusation deserves a rebuttal. Not every question deserves a deep explanation, and not every attack requires a justification. When you respond with calm clarity, statements like, "I don't agree," "That's not accurate," or "I'm not discussing this," you maintain control of your voice and your energy. You're not entering their emotional arena, you're standing outside it. This neutral style of communication sends a message they can't easily manipulate. You're not interested in argument, chaos, or games. You're focused only on facts and limits. Concise responses also interrupt their pattern of dominating conversations. People who rely on control often talk in circles, provoke confusion, and pressure you into over-explaining so they can twist your words later. When you answer briefly, you break that cycle. You take away the opportunity for them to redirect, distort, or weaponize what you've said. Your words become unshakable because they're minimal, intentional, and difficult to alter. The less you say, the less material exists for manipulation. Calmness is the second half of this power. Someone who thrives on emotional chaos needs you to match their energy in order to maintain their advantage. When you stay composed, their attempts to escalate fall flat. If they raise their voice, yours stays steady. If they try to provoke guilt, your tone remains even. If they attempt to drag you into a dramatic argument, your calmness signals that you're not entering that space. This refusal to participate in emotional turbulence strips away the fuel they depend on. There will be moments when your calmness frustrates them, and they may react with sarcasm, anger, or exaggerated emotion to regain control of the situation. But your role is to stay rooted, repeat your clear statement if needed, and refuse to be moved. Over time, this method conditions them to understand that you cannot be pushed into chaotic conversations or emotional traps. Your concise, controlled responses become a firm wall they cannot break through, and each moment you maintain this communication style strengthens your confidence, authority, and emotional independence. Avoiding over-explaining or defending yourself is one of the strongest power moves you can make, because people who rely on control often depend on your need to justify, clarify, and prove your intentions. The more you explain, the more information you hand over, information they can twist, question, or use to push you into doubt. Over-explaining is an emotional habit rooted in wanting to be understood, but with someone who manipulates, understanding is never their true goal. Their goal is control. and every extra sentence you give becomes another thread for them to pull. When you stop defending every action and begin speaking only what is necessary, you remove the very material they need to overpower you. A person who thrives on manipulation doesn't ask questions to learn your perspective. They ask them to destabilize you. Why would you do that? What were you thinking? Are you sure that's true? These questions are crafted to make you feel uncertain, so you'll explain yourself again and again, hoping for fairness or clarity. But fairness never comes because the questions were never genuine. Recognizing this allows you to step out of the trap. Instead of long explanations, you shift to simple statements like, "That's my decision. I'm comfortable with that," or "I've already said what I need to say." These short lines shut down the spiral of justification before it begins. Defensiveness also gives them insight into your emotional triggers. When you defend yourself repeatedly, they learn what makes you anxious, what makes you doubt yourself, and what topics can be used to push you into apologizing for things you didn't do. But when you stop defending every detail, they lose access to those vulnerabilities. Your silence or brief answers create uncertainty for them instead. Suddenly, they can't predict your reactions, can't poke at your insecurities, and can't steer the conversation. They are forced to deal with the reality that you no longer feel obligated to win their approval. This shift may irritate them at first. They might accuse you of hiding something, being difficult, or acting strange. But those accusations are simply attempts to drag you back into the old pattern of explaining yourself. When you refuse to step into that dynamic, they are left without leverage. You begin to communicate from a place of quiet authority rather than emotional need. You stop trying to be understood by someone who never intended to understand you, and in doing so, you reclaim both your voice and your peace. Removing their supply by refusing emotional reactions is one of the most quietly devastating tactics you can use, because someone who thrives on control depends entirely on your responses to feel powerful. Their fuel is your frustration, your confusion, your anger, your fear, your need to fix things, and your constant emotional participation. When you stop providing that fuel, their influence collapses, not suddenly, but steadily, like a fire running out of oxygen. Emotional reactions are the currency they operate on, and the moment you stop spending, the entire dynamic shifts in your favor. They provoke you intentionally. They know exactly which comments will irritate you, which questions will overwhelm you, and which behaviors will make you feel compelled to react. These provocations are not random, they are strategic. They rely on your emotional engagement to validate their importance, maintain their dominance, and keep you in a cycle of responding. When you remove your reactions, you remove their sense of control. Your emotional stillness becomes something they cannot manipulate, predict, or decode. Refusing emotional reactions doesn't mean becoming numb or silent. It means becoming selective. You choose where your emotional energy goes, and you stop giving it to moments that only serve to empower their behavior. If they raise their voice, you remain steady. If they throw subtle insults, you don't flinch. If they try to guilt trip you, you respond with neutrality instead of panic. If they attempt to pull you into an argument, you simply don't enter it. This lack of emotional engagement forces them to face something deeply uncomfortable. They no longer have access to your internal world. At first, they may escalate. They may push harder, become more dramatic, or switch tactics entirely in an attempt to spark the reaction they depend on. But even this escalation is revealing. It shows how reliant they are on your emotional responses to feel relevant or in control. Your job is to stay steady and refuse to feed the cycle. When they realize nothing they do activates the old emotional patterns, the power they once held begins to weaken. Over time, this creates a shift where you no longer feel drained or controlled by their behavior. Instead, you become an observer, not an emotional participant. Their tactics become predictable, almost transparent, because you're no longer blinded by reaction. Every time you choose not to respond emotionally, you reinforce your strength, you reclaim your peace, and you create a dynamic in which their influence fades, not because you fought them, but because you stopped fueling the fire they needed to keep burning. Using strategic silence to regain dominance is a subtle but highly effective tactic because it disrupts the expectation of constant engagement and leaves the other person off balance. Silence is not passive. It is a form of communication that conveys strength, control, and self-possession. When someone is used to dominating conversations, manipulating reactions, or provoking emotional responses, they rely on you filling the gaps with words, explanations, or defenses. By intentionally choosing not to speak, you remove the material they need to manipulate or control you, and in doing so, you flip the power dynamic. Strategic silence works in several ways. First, it creates space for reflection. Instead of responding impulsively or reacting emotionally, you allow yourself to observe, analyze, and decide whether engagement is necessary at all. This means you respond on your terms, not theirs, and you maintain clarity while they scramble to regain footing. Second, silence forces them to confront the absence of reaction, which is often uncomfortable for someone who thrives on eliciting emotional responses. The silence communicates without words that you are not participating in their attempts to control or provoke you. There is also a psychological advantage. People tend to fill silence with their own words, often revealing intentions, insecurities, or contradictions that they would otherwise keep hidden. By remaining silent strategically, you let them overextend themselves. They may repeat points, escalate, or even attempt to explain themselves, all while you retain composure and power. In other words, silence becomes a mirror that reflects their behavior back at them without your interference. However, strategic silence must be intentional, not reactive. It is not about ignoring someone out of anger or frustration. It is about consciously withholding your energy to protect your space and assert authority. Even in moments of provocation, maintaining composed silence communicates confidence and detachment, signaling that you are not emotionally dependent on their behavior or approval. Over time, consistently using strategic silence reshapes interactions. It teaches the other person that their usual tactics no longer provoke or dominate you. It strengthens your sense of control and makes your presence more impactful when you do choose to speak. Silence used wisely is not emptiness. It is a tool of dominance, clarity, and self-respect that leaves others realizing they no longer dictate the emotional or conversational terms of your interactions. Prioritizing self-worth and walking away when needed is the ultimate tactic because it places your value and peace above any attempt at control or manipulation. People who rely on dominance thrive on your willingness to stay in situations that drain you, provoke you, or compromise your boundaries. When you consciously prioritize yourself, you shift the focus from their agenda to your needs. Self-worth is not arrogance or entitlement. It is the recognition that you deserve respect, dignity, and emotional safety. Once you internalize this, no tactic, guilt trip, or subtle attack can destabilize you because your sense of value is self-contained rather than dependent on their approval or reaction. Walking away is a powerful extension of this principle. It is not about avoiding conflict out of fear. It is about reclaiming control over your time, energy, and emotional state. Choosing to disengage sends a clear, nonverbal message. You are not available for manipulation, coercion, or unnecessary drama. This act protects your boundaries, reinforces your self-respect, and demonstrates that your presence is not a resource to be exploited. When done consistently, walking away also conditions the other person to understand that attempts to provoke or control you carry consequences. They lose access to your attention, reaction, or participation. Prioritizing self-worth also strengthens your decision-making. You begin to evaluate situations through the lens of respect and value rather than obligation or fear. This clarity allows you to identify manipulative behavior more quickly, respond more strategically, and avoid cycles of emotional entanglement. It creates a mental framework where you can ask yourself, does this situation honor my worth or is it depleting me? If it is depleting, walking away is not surrender, it is empowerment. Emotionally, this tactic builds resilience. Each time you assert your self-worth by disengaging from manipulation or toxicity, you reinforce the belief that you are not defined by someone else's control. You learn to rely on your own judgment and standards rather than reacting to external pressure. Over time, this transforms interactions entirely. The person attempting control realizes that their old tactics no longer work. Your confidence grows, and the power dynamic shifts permanently. In essence, prioritizing self-worth and walking away establishes a foundation of strength that cannot be shaken, proving that your peace and dignity are always non-negotiable. In conclusion, taking control of your interactions with someone who thrives on manipulation is not about confrontation or aggression. It's about clarity, strength, and self-respect. By recognizing manipulative patterns, maintaining emotional neutrality, setting firm boundaries, responding with calm and concise statements, avoiding over-explaining, removing their emotional fuel, using strategic silence, and prioritizing your own self-worth, you reclaim the power that was never theirs to take. Each tactic is a step toward freedom, ensuring that you are no longer reactive, confused, or controlled. The beauty of these strategies is that they work quietly yet decisively. You don't need to argue, prove yourself, or engage in endless drama. You simply stand grounded, aware, and unshakable. Over time, these practices transform not just the way others interact with you, but how you perceive yourself, stronger, confident, and unmovable. When you master these approaches, you create a space where respect is automatic. Manipulation loses its grip and your peace becomes inviolable. You are no longer an observer of their tactics. You are the author of your own interactions, the guardian of your boundaries, and the holder of your power. The moment you embrace these principles, the dynamic shifts entirely, and you step into a life where control, dignity, and emotional sovereignty belong only to you.